Far beyond the last edge of sunlight, in a region of cold and ink where only lonely particles and faint radio whispers travel, an old human artifact still moves. Launched decades ago, it is small against the vastness. A battered probe that once mapped planets and now drifts between the stars. For years it reported only the thin, steady murmurs of interstellar space. Then its silence changed. At first the change looked like nothing more than a blip. A brief anomaly in a plasma wave recorder. A spike so small it might have been dismissed as noise. But the blip repeated. It returned with a regularity and a shape that did not match any known natural fluctuation. The probe's instruments, aged but reliable, recorded a patterned disturbance, a pulse that rose and fell with mathematical steadiness. What arrived on Earth was not random data, it bore the marks of deliberate structure. Engineers checked hardware logs and software, ruling out degradation, cosmic rays, and calibration faults. Independent observers compared datasets. When measurements from magnetometers, gyroscopes, and particle detectors were layered together, they revealed an unsettling picture. Something was moving in the void near the probe. Not a comet or a stray rock, not a natural body on a ballistic path, but an object whose motion adjusted in subtle ways, maintaining a relative position with the probe as if it were following its wake. The object could not be imaged with ordinary telescopes. It remained just beyond optical reach, detectable only through the way it bent fields and shifted local plasma. Its trajectory did not obey simple gravitational expectation. Simulations attempting to reproduce its motion using known forces failed. The path bent and corrected itself as though the object could manipulate the surrounding fabric of space. In the most unnerving readings, the object's activity appeared to change when the probe transmitted, as if it were listening and reacting. Then something stranger arrived inside the telemetry stream itself. A carrier burst carrying a set of binary patterns that did not originate from the probe's systems. When treated as visual plots, the sequences produced recurring geometric motifs, spirals, crossed loops, interleaving rings, patterns that suggested construction rather than coincidence. Computational linguists and astroanalysts ran those patterns through structural and statistical tests. The conclusion many found hardest to accept was simple and blunt. The signal's form matched what intentional transmissions look like. As these results were shared and checked, archived data were re-examined. A faint, once dismissed anomaly from the other long-lived probe in interstellar space showed a haunting similarity. What had been brushed off as static decades earlier now resembled a first, tentative contact, a brief greeting, perhaps, or a probing gesture. The repetition across time and space implied continuity. This was not a single, isolated event. Something had been present in that region long enough to be encountered twice, years apart. Ground stations around the world began registering faint echoes of the same strange frequency. Radio arrays in distant hemispheres picked up low-level repetitions buried beneath the steady hum of cosmic background noise. Those echoes arrived in synchrony with the probe's transmission schedule as if some distant presence were mirroring or shadowing the probe's signals across vast distances. Attempts to triangulate the source produced no clear position. Instead, the effect seemed diffuse, smeared over a broad volume of space. Analysts coined a provisional name, the phantom pulse. Speculation ran quickly and wildly. Some scientists cautioned restraint. Instrument artifacts and unknown natural plasma phenomena can masquerade as pattern. Others argued the simplest interpretation of the data, that an intelligent agent or engineered structure had revealed itself, could not be ignored. A handful of theoretical groups proposed mechanisms that edged toward the extraordinary, controlled manipulations of electromagnetic fields, localized warping of spacetime to remain out of sight, or the deliberate embedding of messages into the background radiation of the interstellar medium. Inside a handful of research centers, quiet conversations hardened into something urgent and focused. Lab corridors that usually hummed with routine testing emptied as teams clustered around consoles. Senior scientists who normally released findings in measured, peer-reviewed papers were summoned into late-night rooms to brief small, need-to-know groups. There were reports, some official, some whispered, of restricted briefings where only a handful of agencies and research institutions were present. Sensitive projects were paused, hardware and data pipelines were rerouted. For the first time in living memory, the usual openness of scientific inquiry contracted into closed doors and guarded statements while a limited circle parsed implications that could not yet be shared publicly. If the phenomenon proved to be interactive and selective, responding only after decades, as if waiting, then its timing became more than accident. It implied deliberation. Perhaps whatever sat in that dark region had been observing quietly, cataloging the faint signatures of human radio leakage and primitive telemetry for decades, and until our decoding tools and the maturity of AI analysis reached a certain threshold, it simply remained silent. If that was true, the recent disturbance was not a random encounter but a carefully chosen moment to make contact, an invitation, or a test designed to reveal intent and comprehension. Such a possibility reframed the event from a mere observational curiosity into a philosophical crossroads. Had we crossed a threshold in technological sophistication that made us interesting to something else? On the technical front, the signal's spectral fingerprints became a source of both excitement and dread. Teams ran exhaustive Fourier and wavelet analyses, comparing the incoming structure against catalogs of natural emissions, modulated pulsar timings, and known plasma interactions. The standout feature was an intentional inversion and modulation of hydrogen line harmonics, the so-called 21 cm line that astrophysicists treat as a universal beacon. Where natural processes produce broad, noisy profiles around that frequency, the anomaly carved precise notches, phase reversals, and amplitude envelopes that repeated with mathematical consistency. In effect, the universe's loudest, most ubiquitous spectral signature had been bent into a patterned sequence. For a transmitter aiming to be noticed across the noise of interstellar space, this was an elegant choice. Speak in the loudest voice and shape it into something meaningful. But intent can be neutral or malevolent. The alteration itself revealed nothing about motives. As raw streams and processed plots accumulated, the object's behavior appeared to shift. The anomaly's activity waxed and waned in step with human actions. When the probe's transmitters fell silent, whether by design or due to scheduled deep space housekeeping, the local disturbances subsided. When ground teams intentionally varied transmit power, changed modulation schemes, or inserted structured probe-to-Earth test packets, the disturbances flared or reconfigured an apparent response. This reactive profile suggested more than passive detection. It implied a capacity to sense, interpret, and react. Far from a benign hitchhiker in the dark, the presence behaved like a sentinel that adjusted posture depending on whether it was being observed or engaged. Whatever its nature, a remnant of an extinct intelligence, an engineered construct intentionally concealed within the interstellar medium, or a natural phenomenon that happens to mimic agency, the encounter altered the conceptual map of the cosmos. For the first time, a human artifact that had wandered beyond the sun's protective bubble returned evidence that the deep void itself can host dynamics that interact with our instruments in ways consistent with purposeful signaling. The distinction mattered. If the effect was engineered, it meant the universe harbored technology calibrated to intercept and perhaps even manipulate our probes. If natural, it meant our models of plasma physics and field interactions were still fatally incomplete.